We all worship something. Every day, we wake up and choose to give praise, adoration, and attention to the thing we care the most about. It's what we're designed to do. Heart, mind, body, spirit, all working together to glorify the most important things in our lives. But what are those things? Money? Power? Entertainment? Celebrity? What do we worship? The truth is, it's a choice. We choose what we praise. Every day, God is whispering, "Choose me." In every sunrise, in every new day, in every blessing, choose me. In every dark night, in every trial, and in every circumstance, choose me.
Good to see you this morning. And I'm going to start like I often start with a message as we continue this series on Made to Worship. I often start with a kind of building a foundation, a couple truths. So I have a couple truths for you today to build the foundation of everything else that will be said. And the first truth we just saw is that everyone worships something. Everybody worships something. You've probably heard that before. You've probably thought that before. But if you think about how you spend your time, how you spend your resources, your emotional energy, your thoughts, you think about all that, and you'll get a pretty good idea of what it is that you worship or what you value most over anything else. And the second truth is this. This is made popular. This wasn't invented by the economist Milton Friedman, but it was made popular by him back in the 60s, and it's this truth. It's that there's no such thing as a free lunch. No such thing as a free lunch. And he goes on and explains that. If you had an economics class, you probably learned about Milton Friedman. He says it describes opportunity cost. This whole phrase describes opportunity cost, the idea that every gain has a trade-off, even if it's not obvious. So for instance, if a friend offers to meet you and buy you lunch, that's free to you. There's no cost out of your pocket, but you do pay a cost for that lunch. So you pay the cost in terms of the opportunity. You could have done something else or been with somebody else. Maybe you pay for some parking. You give the time. Maybe the restaurant isn't your particular flavor, but you do it anyway because you value the relationship. So there's a cost to everything. Well, no free lunch applies to our Christian life. This no free lunch truth applies to our Christian life because while salvation is free to us, it was paid for by someone. And that's a cost that Jesus paid. We know that. But as we grow in the Christian life, as we grow in maturity, as we grow in intimacy with the Lord and relationship with other people, there's a cost that we pay as believers. And today's focus is the cost of worship. The cost of worship. So if you hear nothing else this morning, just hear this next thing I'm going to say, and then you can go to sleep if you'd like. But this next phrase will be the whole sermon in a message, and that's this. The big truth is that worship without cost is worship without worth. So worship without cost is worship without worth. So worship isn't necessarily a song, the songs that we just sang. Worship isn't necessarily your Bible reading. Isn't necessarily an hour on church every week. It's not a check that you write to drop in the offering. It does include all those things. But as I think about worship, as I've always thought about this idea, this truth of the Christian life being worship, I've always thought of it this way, that this represents worship. And you think about that for a second. It says that worship is a compass. In other words, worship is an orientation. It's a life orientation. Sometimes we call that a worldview. And so in this regard, it does include the list of things I just named, attending church and singing songs, things like that, but it's bigger than that. So the dynamic with a compass is that no matter how you turn it, it always reorients itself to point to true north. And likewise, a life that is oriented toward God, no matter how you turn it, whatever the circumstances might be, always reorients itself toward Him. So that's worship. Well, worship has always been costly. Worship has always been costly. And if you look through the book of Hebrews, it'll show us that not every sacrifice has been sufficient. They're all costly, but they're not all sufficient. Hebrews lays it out kind of in layers. It says the old covenant system was built on the giving of something valuable. There's always a cost made when a worship is offered, when a sacrifice is offered. And that was never done casually, never done quickly, never done, in a 5-minute drive on the way to work, listening to a part of a devotional or something like that. Worship is always costly. Here's what Hebrews says about that old covenant system. It says, those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sins. It's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. So it says that those sacrifices functioned as a reminder of sins, but not as a resolution for them at all. They had to be repeated, and they never really fully removed sin. So cost alone doesn't necessarily equal effectiveness. Even though the Old Testament system was costly, it was inadequate. But when Jesus came along, He completely revolutionized, completely redefined the cost of worship. Instead of more sacrifices, there's one final sacrifice. Hebrews says the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who are ceremonially unclean, sanctify them so they are outwardly clean. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered Himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences, it's a key word, from acts that lead to death. So the law and the sacrifices made people clean ceremonially, maybe outwardly, but one of the internal results, we just sang about the blood of Christ, one of the internal results of the blood of Christ, I love this, it cleanses us inwardly, our conscience. And when I think of that phrase, cleanse our conscience from acts that lead to death, here's what I think of. I think of that old covenant system of offering sacrifices. I think of the fact that you raise your animal to be a sacrifice, or you have the resources maybe to go to temple and purchase an animal for sacrifice. Think about you've got one day of atonement. You've got one day in the entire year when we go and we travel to Jerusalem and we offer our sacrifice, and we stand in line all day, and all the animal poop and all the smells and the smell of burning flesh and the dust and all that is designed to cleanse me outwardly. But what's always in my conscience is I've got to remember all these sins, because when it's my turn to get up here and offer the sacrifice, I don't want to forget anything. And so it's always kind of on me. I'm always thinking about sin. And so standing in line all day, waiting for that to happen, that is a weight. But the blood of Christ cleanses the conscience from acts that lead to death. As soon as you and I are aware of sin, we can confess it and move on with it, be done with it, if we choose. I hope we do choose that. So Jesus, Hebrews says, Jesus is the priest, He's the sacrifice, and He's the payment. We go on in Hebrews, says Jesus did not enter heaven to offer Himself again and again. If that had been necessary, Christ would have had to die again and again. But now, once for all time, He's appeared at the end of the age to remove sin by His own death as a sacrifice. Christ was offered again, once for all time, as a sacrifice to take away the sins of many people. So Hebrews tells us that worship is costly, but only Jesus' offering was sufficient. Worship is costly, but only the offering that Jesus made was sufficient. So I'm going to look at what this costly worship looks like in a couple people's lives. The first one is the life of David. If you go to 2 Samuel 24, there's an occasion where David sinned. He took a census. He ordered a census to be taken of all the military men so he could kind of, sum up how many bodies do we have able to fight. Rather than rely on the Lord, he relied upon that census. God sent a prophet to him and said, that's sin. You're not trusting me. You're trusting in your resources. So God's judgment falls on David, and a sacrifice is required. So David's response is he goes to a guy by the name of Araunah, who owns a threshing floor, And he asked to buy that from him so he could make the sacrifice. And Araunah sees the king coming and says, hey, you can have the whole thing. You can have the ground, you can have the threshing floor, you can have the animals, you can have the equipment. It's all yours. I gladly give it for the king of Israel. And David's famous response is this. David says, I will not present burnt offerings to the Lord my God that have cost me nothing. David understood that worship is costly. He understands that worship needs to cost something, but he's living in a system where even costly worship is insufficient. As we just saw, it can't fully take care of the sin issues. So here's the point. Outside of relationship with Jesus, even the best sacrifices fall short, and they have to be offered over and over again. And that happens even today. Not sacrifices, of course. I hope not. But outside of relationship with Jesus, repeating the same prayers over and over and over again, trying to, assuage my conscience of guilt. So if you think about your own life, If your worship or if your life orientation never disrupts your comfort, is it actually worship? Is it really worship? And then what might you be trusting right now to deal with guilt? Your own effort or Christ's effort? A couple questions to think about. So that's David. Now let's look at another person who exemplifies costly worship, but this person's worship points in the right direction. It points to Jesus. In John chapter 12, there was a dinner in honor of Jesus. And Mary and Martha were there. Their brother Lazarus was there, who one chapter before in John chapter 11 was dead, but Jesus took care of that. And so Lazarus is now at this dinner party. And here's what John writes. He says, then Mary took a pint of pure nard and an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So here's Mary, again, at the feet of Jesus. We've seen her in the Gospels in that position before. And Mary is showing absolutely no regard whatsoever for the expense that she just poured out over Jesus' feet. Almost no awareness, though she probably did have some knowledge that it was quite expensive. Didn't care. No concern at all for the cost of her worship. She's just willing to pour it out for Jesus. Now, some people objected to Mary's worship, if you can imagine. Judas, in fact, said this. He said, why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? In other words, I think, if I could translate that, hey, Jesus, why is Mary being so reckless? Why is she being so irresponsible? I mean, yeah, we worship you, but come on, there's a limit here, okay? Let's not get crazy. Let's not be fanatical. Let's be reasonable in our worship. Well, you and I know that Mary wasn't being reckless at all. She was being worshipful. She did what David did. She gave something costly, but she directed it to Jesus. Jesus says to Judas and the others, hey, leave her alone. She did this in preparation for my burial. You'll always have the poor among you, but you won't always have me. So let me follow that up with a couple questions. Are you more concerned with what worship orientation costs you, or with what Jesus is worth? And then would you describe your worship as extravagant or just convenient? Let me pause here and say this. When I'm up here teaching, I ask a lot of questions. I like to pepper a lot of questions throughout things here. And I hope that when I do that, my prayer is that the questions, your answers to the questions encourage you. I hope they challenge you. I hope they convict you when that's necessary. I hope they bother you sometimes. I hope you're really uncomfortable with some of them. But I can tell you this, before I ever put that on a slide, before I ever say it, I'm asking myself those same questions. All the time, asking myself the same thing. I say that to say this, these questions are not ever an interrogation. They're more like an assessment between you and the Lord. to figure out where you stand. But I've got to tell you this, over all the questions I've asked over all the years, not just here, but other places and chapel services and whatever, this second one bothers me the most. The second question has bugged me all week. Would anyone describe your worship as extravagant or just convenient? And I can tell you personally, one of the things I never want to do is live the Christian life just because I know how to do it. Just because, you do it so long, you just know, you write the check, you show up on time, you shake people's hands at the doors, you sing the song, all good stuff. But you can do that mindlessly just because you know how to do it. So I ask this of myself, so then are those acts of worship, or is that just you doing what you know how to do? That question bugs me. Actually, the question doesn't bother me. What I think the answer might be is what bothers me. And it goes along with the other question earlier about worship disrupting your comfort. So is my worship, is my orientation extravagant, or have I just gotten used to it? Okay. Well, if you're bothered by the question, or your answers to any of these questions, I would say this. I'd say join the club, man. Get in line. Join the club. I think it's actually a good place to be. So while I'm bothered by some of these questions, for me personally, I'm also okay with it because that's a sign of life. And if you're wrestling with these questions, with something else, I would say this, what I often tell people, and they say that, hey, here's a thing in my life I'm wrestling with, I'm bothered by this. I usually tell them two things. First of all, man, I'm sorry to hear that, that's a drag, but yeah, understood. And the second thing I tell them is, good, I'm glad you're wrestling. I'd be more concerned if you came and said, I've got this thing in my life, you know what, I'm not wrestling. Screw it, I just threw in the towel, I'm just going to give in to it and do whatever I feel like doing. That would be tragic. So wrestle away. Jacob wrestled with the Lord and wouldn't let go, and God blessed him. Well, let me come back to David because his story makes an important point, though it's not immediately obvious in the scripture. And the point is this, is one of your fill-ins, I think. Authentic worship is never just personal. It has the potential to become legacy. Authentic worship, authentic orientation toward God has the potential to become legacy. And I say that for this reason, because the place where David worshiped, where that threshing floor was located, is Mount Moriah. And there's a history to that. This is the place where about 900 years before David, Abraham offered his son Isaac. Same piece of ground, same hill. Fast forward from David, 50 to 60 years, his son Solomon built a temple on that same piece of ground. After that temple was torn down, 70 years later, the second temple was built. Now there's a temple there now. It's not for God, it's for someone else, but God's not done with that piece of ground. And so my question is for you is this: what foundations are you building for others by the way you worship, by your orientation? Think about your kids, think about your neighbors, your friends, co-workers, whoever it might be, anybody you have relationship with or over whom or with whom you have influence. What foundation are you maybe helping them to build? Are they getting from being around you? Because over time the form evolves on Mount Moriah, but the function never does. The purpose always remains. So there's a guy I've been watching over the past few months. I'm not really I don't follow podcasts, and I mean, nothing wrong with that, I just don't. Not a podcast follower, sorry. That's just not me. But there's a guy I caught my attention several months ago, and I've seen him pop up here and there, and I have watched this. This guy's name is Ben Sasse. Ben Sasse was a 2-term U.S. Senator, former president of the University of Florida, a believer, a good believer, former president of a smaller Lutheran college, and just before Christmas, about 4 months ago, Ben Sasse was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It was like December 20th or 21st or something like that. And the doctor on that day of his appointment said, "Your entire spine is filled with tumors. They're not only in your spine, they're around your spine. In fact, your whole torso you're way beyond any surgical options. And that quickly metastasized through other parts of his body, so he's pretty filled with cancer. Doctors, as I said, you're way beyond surgical options here. And as Ben Sass says, I've always been aware as a Christian, I've always been aware that, hey, we're all on the clock, okay? We are all on the clock. But he says, now that I've received this diagnosis, I'm just aware that my clock is more visible to me right now. It's right in front of me, kind of front and center. Well, he's in a clinical trial right now, taking super, super aggressive treatments with really, really brutal side effects, one of which is bleeding from different parts of his body, his face, and the inability to grow skin. So this is several days after a treatment, and as you can see, the wounds are still pretty fresh. Just skin won't grow. But what makes Ben Sass, for me, what makes Ben Sass worth watching is not what he has to say about politics. He says that Washington, D.C. is Hollywood for ugly people, which is kind of interesting. But beyond what he has to say about politics, beyond what he has to say about education, about culture, about government, he's got some interesting things to say there. Way beyond that, what's more interesting to me is what he says about worship, about life orientation. Now, this isn't a direct quote, but this is kind of a summary of some of the things he said on these various podcasts. Worship is costly because it requires choosing what truly matters over what is easy or consumable. It requires reordering your loves away from comfort, consumption, and self. Worship requires reordering your loves away from comfort and consumption and self. And he says, we've always gone, as a family, they've always gone to church. They never missed. They always were faithful in that. And he said, if I could do anything over or speak to the next generation, I would tell them this one thing: observe the Sabbath and keep it holy. He said, we go to church, we come home, we eat, and about 2 o'clock I'm getting fidgety, and I dive right back into work, either as a senator, a university president, or whatever it was. Just work the rest of the day rather than just be with his family. This is a guy with a life sentence coming pretty quickly. So I think that's worth listening to. So I can imagine, I'm not in his shoes, I can imagine, or I think I can imagine, that when you're staring down a terminal diagnosis, whatever you've been worshiping, whatever your orientation has been, gets revealed pretty quickly, right in front of your eyes. And that brings us back to where we started, and that's this, that everybody worships something. So the question has never been about whether you'll give yourself to something. We all do. The question is more, what will you give yourself to? What will you give yourself to? Because here's the truth that this no free lunch quote tells us. Whatever you worship, it's going to cost you. Whatever you and I worship, it's going to cost you. There's a cost to comfort. There's a cost to status and popularity. There's a cost to putting yourself first. There's a cost to everything. But when the object of your worship is Jesus, the worship team can come if you'd like. When the object of your worship is Jesus, the one who paid the cost no one else could, then worship you bring isn't a payment, it's a response. The worship that you and I bring is not a payment, it's a response. And David said it best, I won't offer to God something that costs me nothing. So be careful not to bring God the leftovers of a lifetime spent worshiping something inferior to Jesus. I would not want to be, and I don't think you would want to be in the position like a Ben Sass, whatever the circumstances might be, where you're approaching the end of life, or you think you might be, and you look back, and I spent an entire lifetime offering worship, maybe air quotes worship, to something inferior to Jesus. Because remember our big truth for today, worship without cost is worship that's without worth.